Okay, so far we've heard about the research and the evidence that underpins NoHoW. We've just heard about the toolkit. So what I'm going to do is talk about the trial itself and how we've brought everything together. Ultimately, we've had quite a large challenge on our hands. We've needed to develop and deliver a large-scale, complex trial in 3 different countries, which is the UK, Denmark, and Portugal. And we've needed to recruit 1,600 participants, which is just over 500 participants per centre. And we are recruiting from what is essentially a hard-to-reach population. So we're after people who have lost 5% of their body weight in the past 12 months, maintained that weight loss, and also had a starting BMI of 25 or more. On top of that, this is a digital intervention, and we're using multiple platforms of software to collect data. We've got the toolkit, and we've needed a way to evaluate this. So we've had to develop a robust data collection and evaluation procedure. So I'm going to share a little bit about how we've done that, and talk about the challenges and solutions that we've come across, and also where we hope to go in terms of sort of research and practice. So just to kind of very quickly whiz through, for anybody who's just joined the symposium, basically we've taken from the research what we know works for weight loss maintenance. We're interested in self-regulation, motivation, stress management and emotion regulation, and also self-weighing, which we also want to understand about tracking technologies and how they play a role. And what we've done is we've developed the trial design around this. So we've got a 2x2 factorial design, randomized controlled trial. And this design basically gives us the greatest power to be able to work out how self-regulation versus emotion regulation actually impact on weight loss maintenance compared to self-weighing. And it also gives us the ability to be able to look into interactions between these components. So we've taken the 4 different versions of the toolkit, mapped it onto the trial design, and what we get is this NoHoW protocol. We're actually delivering this trial across 18 months, so the participant journey begins with quite a rigorous screening process to make sure that they're eligible. And then they're randomized into the intervention, which is where we start collecting the data. The toolkit that they receive it's an active intervention. It lasts for about 6 months, which is, as Antonio mentioned, you get access to modules and content. It's all very interactive. After that, we follow them up for another 12 months. During that time, they can still access the content of the toolkit, and there's things for them to do on a daily basis. And as Antonio mentioned, you can revisit sessions that they've enjoyed. The other good thing about this trial design is that we've got repeated measures in here. We're measuring at 4 different time points, and that's going to help us understand whether there's any changes in the things that we're evaluating. So Antonio briefly introduced the logic models, and he talked about them in terms of how they specify the causal mechanisms between the mediators, the moderators, and the outcomes. But in the context of developing the toolkit, what we've also done is we've used this logic model to inform what we need to evaluate. So all these factors actually make up our primary and secondary outcomes. So in terms of our primary outcomes, we are obviously wanting to understand the impact of these different interventions on weight, but we also want to understand how they impact on biomarkers. So we're looking at full lipid, which is cholesterol. We're looking at HbA1c, which is a biomarker of diabetes, and also the stress hormone cortisol. We're also wanting to understand the effects on body composition over time. And then in terms of the secondary outcomes, they're largely made up of the different mediators and moderators specified in the toolkit. So we've got everything associated with self-regulation and motivation, and also emotion regulation. We want to understand things about weight loss history, physical activity and eating behaviour, and we're also looking at quality of life, which will inform our cost-effectiveness analysis. So we're also interested in understanding how tracking technologies actually play a part in weight loss maintenance. What we do is we give participants a Fitbit Charge 2, which measures physical activity, sleep, and heart rate. And we also give them the Fitbit ARIA scales, which is digital smart scales. And the great thing about working with these devices is we've integrated them into the toolkit so they become part of the intervention, but also it's a data collection method. So by using these things, and obviously it's a commercial provider which have amazing data aggregation capabilities, what that actually means is we're going to be collecting minute-by-minute data in physical activity, sleep, and heart rate, and also weekly weight data, which we hope is going to give us great insight into what actually works for weight loss maintenance. Now, running parallel to the trial itself and the trial design is we have the user experience and process evaluation. We're using mixed methods for this. So we have a series of questionnaires, very short questionnaires, that are delivered sort of 1 month after randomization, and then again at 3, 6, and 12 months. And this is looking at everything to do with user experience and their satisfaction with the toolkit, do they trust the toolkit, and also their engagement with it. And this is obviously important because if people aren't satisfied, then they might be less motivated to use the toolkit and also the devices. And then we've got a qualitative element. So around 6 months, we start inviting participants to a focus group. And this is going to delve a little bit deeper. We're going to get into the contextual factors. So we're wanting to understand how the toolkit and the Fitbit devices actually play a part in these people's lives. How do they integrate? What about other kinds of support that they might be receiving, or other digital apps or interventions, given that apps are becoming far more commonplace now. And then one of the really good advantages of working with digital tools is that you can get this extra layer of data that you can't get from face-to-face services or interventions. And that's this metadata. It's very similar to things like Google Analytics, if anybody's familiar with that. But ultimately what it does is we're logging data from the toolkit. So we can start to understand the pattern of use, the number of times people have logged in, which modules have they looked at. And this is going to be really important to start understanding things to do with engagement and dose. It'll be able to help us answer questions around, do people actually need 6 months of the intervention in order for it to be effective? Do they need more? Do they need less? Things like that. Now, one of the challenges, like I said at the beginning, is trying to bring everything together. One of the criticisms of large-scale behaviour change trials is that they're so complex, it's very difficult to disentangle exactly what works. So what we've done is we've developed, alongside the toolkit, this NoHoW ICT architecture. We're working with over 5 different data collection platforms. So we've got the toolkit itself, we've got online food diaries, which is done on a software called Intake 24. We've got all the Fitbit devices, and then we've got the questionnaires, which are all online as well, delivered via Qualtrics. And what you end up with is this obviously quite complicated looking diagram. But to simplify things, basically, we have a data hub, and we need to get all the data in the data hub from all the devices. So we've built connections. I won't go into too much detail because it is quite technical. But basically, we've developed connections so that most of the data goes directly into the data hub. If it doesn't, then we've built connections with our trial management software. So pulling it all together then, we've got the toolkit, we've got the 2x2 factorial design, which is going to be evaluated as the data comes into the data hub. One of the other things we have that I haven't yet talked about is that we've built in some individualized prediction models into the toolkit. So what these algorithms do is as the data starts coming in, it starts to look for helpful patterns of behavior. And if these algorithms can find those helpful patterns of behavior in the data, it will push feedback into the toolkit. So, for example, it might detect that doing a certain amount of physical activity or doing physical activity on a certain day or a certain time of day might be better for weight maintenance. Or sleep, quantity of sleep. And any messages around that will get pushed into the toolkit and the user will be able to receive them. And then once we've evaluated this and understand exactly what works, we're hoping to move forward and work with commercial providers to develop business models. So in the UK, we're going to be working with Slimming World to work out how to actually commercialise this project so that we can have larger impact. Now, the development of the trial hasn't been without its challenges. It's actually taken 2 years to develop all of this, and we've gone through a series of pilot studies, feasibility studies, each time refining the toolkit and the trial design and the ICT architecture. We finally went live. We've started data collecting. We started the main trial in March this year, so everything's in its infancy. But some of the challenges that we faced is obviously this large-scale data capture. We've also needed to try and digitalize things that are usually paper-based, like food diaries, and also tracking weight. And the solutions for this, rather than making our own equipment or devices, which is often timely, costly, and also generally reinventing the wheel, we've started using and working with other experts and commercial providers out there, like Qualtrics and Fitbit. Some of the other challenges we've faced is obviously trying to deliver this in 3 different countries. In order to do this correctly, we have to make sure that the protocol is implemented exactly the same way so to avoid any sort of site variations. So the harmonisation of the protocol, we've had things like with the questionnaires, for example, we needed to translate all of those questionnaires into 3 different languages. And the risk of that is you start losing psychometric properties and also losing the cultural relevance if it isn't done correctly. So we've used research-grade translation services following robust procedures where we've used independent translators, forward and back translation. Like any trial, there's always the risk of contamination between the arms. So we've implemented a series of strategies to try and avoid that contamination. Some of those strategies have been to do with the technology. For example, automating messages, making scripts for emails and all that sort of thing. But also we've embedded some criteria into the exclusion criteria so that anybody, if you can only have 1 person per household joining the trial to avoid any of that contamination. And then, of course, the other challenge is that we are trying to recruit a hard-to-reach population. So recruitment is always going to be a challenge. And what we've done here is we've used multiple approaches across the 3 different centres. In the UK, we're working with Slimming World, our commercial partners, but we've also got weight registries and other weight management services on board. Those are our big strategies, and we've also found what's really helpful is sort of fueling the pipeline with smaller posters and leaflets and all that kind of thing. We've used quite a lot of strategies which seem to be working at the moment. We've only been running the trial for 2 months, and in the first month we managed to smash our 3-month recruitment target. We've currently got about 250 people already in the trial and randomized, and we've got about 500 other people on the waiting list. So recruitment's doing very well at the moment. In terms of some lessons that we've learned then, obviously delivering a trial like this, it has to be multidisciplinary. We're made up of, the consortium is made up of a range of disciplines from psychologists, behaviour change experts, physiologists and IT specialists. But one of the other major lessons that we've learned is obviously the pace of technology. Technology is growing exponentially. Whatever you develop today is generally outdated tomorrow. So the recommendations for anybody designing digital interventions is that it has to be pragmatic, and what you're actually testing is the concept. So that when you understand what works, what you do is you pick that content up and you drop it into whatever happens to be available or fashionable or common at the time. So then finally, in terms of practical implications and where we hope to go, ultimately, we hope that the research from NoHoW is going to strengthen the evidence base around what works for weight loss maintenance. We hope to understand more about the role of digital in behaviour change in healthcare. We hope to understand more about the theoretical determinants, the self-regulation and emotion regulation aspects, who they work for, who they don't work for. And particularly what kind of tools, the behaviour change techniques, we really need to know and understand a lot more about that to inform healthcare. And then obviously with the development of the business models, we really hope that to enhance the production and co-production of healthcare, particularly on an international scale. So thank you, and if you want to find out a little bit more about NoHoW, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and also visit our webpage. And if you've got any questions, I'm happy to take some.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there a very short question? We could take that before we take the general discussion. There's one there, please.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it's a very useful toolkit. My question is it adaptable to a low and very low socioeconomic strata? Is it user-friendly enough that people with low academic degree can understand and use it? And is it appealing for this kind of population?
Yeah, it's a good question. We had a pilot study and we actually looked at digital literacy. So we assessed whether people could understand and use technology, and actually it was very good. So we, in our target population and the people that we're trying to recruit, it does seem to apply. But going forward, that's exactly what we're going to try and analyse and understand exactly who are the kinds of people that this sort of digital intervention will apply to.